First of all, thank you very much for the privilege and the honor of being asked to do a presentation here at RATPAC. I have known of the group, of course, for a long, long time, but not actually participated in it until the opportunity came along. Initially with uh, initially with W6DQ, and then later with good old Steve Waterman, who wound up calling me up and saying you should do this. So anyway, I did. So what I'm going to before I actually start with the real presentation, let me give you a little bit of background on the Coast Guard Auxiliary because I'm not sure that everybody would have the same understanding for one thing, and secondly, I'm not sure that they would necessarily be able to understand some of the things that I'm going to talk about later, which might be a little strange for people unless they've seen it before. So, um, we, as I've said earlier, this is really a function of work that I and Ray Montagna, who is there somewhere, W7CIA, have been doing along with a group of other people as part of our role in managing high frequency comms for Coast Guard Auxiliary, primarily in the West, but now in more than that in Pacific Basin. But we'll get to that in a little bit. Okay. And for those of you who don't know, some of you do know, I also work for Ham Radio Outlet, and I've worked for Ham Radio Outlet for 27 years now. So you may run across me at that particular place. That's Ham Radio Outlet in Anaheim is where I am, where I'm regular there. And there's the other racing stripe. The difference between the active duty racing stripe and the auxiliary is the color swap. So the big one for active duty Coast Guard is red, and the auxiliary is blue, and vice versa. So the what I want to start out talking about is answering this question. Really, the Coast Guard auxiliary does that, and you're going to see two purposes in this presentation. One of them is the obvious one, but one is maybe not quite so obvious. First of all, you're going to see hang on a second, let me minimize that. Get it out of my way. Oh, come on. Oh, well, all right. I'll just leave it where it is. Um, the first of the purposes is to share with you some of the different things that we do in Coast Guard Auxiliary Communications with regard to activities and objectives that you might not think about because one of the roles that we play in Coast Guard Auxiliary is as a force multiplier for the actual Coast Guard itself. And so that there are things that we're going to talk about that might never have occurred to you that as a volunteer communications organization, we might actually do. Second, it's a little bit of a recruiting poster. I and all of us in the Coast Guard Auxiliary are really proud of what we do, the responsibilities we take on, the uniform we wear, etc. And naturally, of course, we like to believe that other people would like to participate. So, one of the reasons that I'm doing this is to share with you some of the things that we do and accomplish in the communications world, because it's a kind of a not a surprise exactly, but it's a kind of unexpected thing for a lot of people that answers that question. That really the Coast Guard Auxiliary does that, and if you want to, you can, if you have some interest in pursuing more of the possible relationship with the organization, you can go to this URL, join.cgox.org. And you can, if you Google just join Coast Guard Auxiliary, it'll take you there as well. So. All right. So, what is the Coast Guard Auxiliary? Again, it's a kind of different situation than a lot of people are aware of. It's uniformed civilian, non-military component of the Coast Guard, period. We are as much of the Coast Guard as the active duty Coast Guard. We're as much as the Coast Guard Reserve, et cetera, et cetera. So we're just part of the Coast Guard as a unit. It was created in the run-up to World War II in 1939, and currently there are about 21,000 people in the world, most of which are in the U.S., but in the world in general, who are members in good standing of the Coast Guard Auxiliary. And we are, in terms of our responsibilities and missions, we are authorized to literally participate in all of the U.S. Coast Guard missions except for law enforcement and combat. Anything else we can do and occasionally do. So what we focus on, however, is search and rescue, waterways and port security, recreational boating safety, and most recently, this idea of force multiplication or augmentation is the other word that's used for it. Um, and one example of that is communications. There are lots of other things as well, including running galleys at Coast Guard stations and aboard ship. Um, it's organized in the same way, all the way from national down to local, where we have national leadership and staff officers, then area leadership. Area, there are three of them in the world: Pacific, Atlantic West, and Atlantic East, and then districts within areas. So, for example, where I am, the district is California, Arizona, Utah, and Nevada. That's District 11, and it's divided into two parts. But from Coast Guard point of view, it's District 11. And then there are staff officers who, besides the line officers, so to speak, who are responsible for particular tasks like communications as well as others. Just about all of the operations are carried out at the request of either active duty Coast Guard commands or senior auxiliary leadership. In other words, there's no self-activation. We do not activate ourselves. It's always from the top down, either auxiliary leadership or the Coast Guard units. Let's put it that way. So, what makes the Coast Guard Auxiliary different? Because it's a uniform part of the Coast Guard, many of the rules of operation in the Coast Guard apply also to us. For example, parts, but fortunately not all, of the UCMJ, the Universal Code of Military Justice. That's one of the differences, that where we separate from other kinds of organizations that do similar things. We report to the Coast Guard through a senior active duty U.S. Coast Guard officer in each of the districts. And by senior, that means lieutenant commander or higher. And for telecoms purposes, telecommunications purposes, an officer who is on the staff of the district commander for whatever district that we are in. Or in case of an area, in my situation, I report not to somebody at the district level, but somebody um, at the area level. So multiple districts. We'll come to that in a little bit for a little more detail. Um, and when we operate under orders, in quotes. If we travel, we traditional TDY orders, temporary duty orders, or if we don't travel, we operate under what is called an official assignment to duty. And when that happens, our radios, our facilities are considered U.S. government radios. So we operate with the same privileges as a federal government radio station would. Um, and we, in fact, offer for use, and that's a legal phrase, offer for use by the Coast Guard our facilities, which means that if they wish, they can come in and simply take them and use them and then maybe give them back if they feel like it. Um, with some very limited exceptions, Coast Guard radio facilities are only used when activated by either the Coast Guard or a senior Coast Guard auxiliary official. So, just for background, my personal background in the auxiliary is I've been in the auxiliary for 25 years. Started just about 25 years ago in the spring of 2000, and I've piled up almost 10,000 documented hours of volunteer services in that 25 years. first few years, I was typical volunteer type and acting as a boat crewman, switching to telecommunications in about 2004 because, frankly, I got bored to tears with just boring holes in the water. I wanted to do some other stuff, and that's the reason for my switching over to telecoms. As a result of that, I've held just about all of the appointed staff officer positions in comms in the Coast Guard Auxiliary, including having served as the national chief for telecommunications for the Coast Guard Auxiliary. And most recently, I got appointed as the operations assistant to somebody whose title is Deputy National Commodore for Pacific Area. I was in January of 2025. Um, so that's why I get to have the fourth stripe because I can be the equivalent of captain's rank. He is that person who's the Deputy National Commodore is the equivalent of a two-star admiral. Um, Type. So that's where I stand now at this point. Um, okay, so one of the things that began actually in the fall, in the fall of 2019, right at the beginning of the pandemic, I got a request from an active duty lieutenant commander to help find a solution to a problem that he had uncovered. Um, the simplest way to describe the solution is that in the attempt to save money, the Coast Guard had eliminated all of the possible vehicles for strategic comms communication between the sectors, which that's the group just below a district in the active duty Coast Guard sector. Between those sectors and the relevant strategic comms facility for handling as the command center for District 11. He had discovered a problem that had created a single point of failure. And so he went looking for a solution because he realized that was not very good. It turned out in conversation that we in that part of the Coast Guard Auxiliary had actually been doing something for 10 years that maybe might have the facility to provide this kind of a structure for it. He was looking for a way to provide bulletproof, infrastructure independent comms network for written, fixed format strategic traffic. And that um, network we needed to be able to survive a complete loss of internet and satcom capabilities. So that was kind of the target that we were given. We started and then at the end of 2019 and worked on the project between then and the end of 2023. There were during that time 3 major full-scale exercises, and by full scale, for those of you not familiar with the phrase, for full-size exercises, what that means is you do exactly as you would do in the real world. And so you're deploying stations to the field. You're assigning people particular jobs. You may run more than 24 hours in a day. All kinds of things like that. It all depends, but that's the idea. So what we did is we did these exercises that tied together up to 15 U.S. Coast Guard shore units. Nothing at sea, nothing in the air, but shore units. So that's command centers at the area level, at the district level, at the sector level, and in some cases at one level down, which would be what is called a station in the Coast Guard. And that's what we did. We were successful. And like often happens when you're successful, somebody says, "Oh, good job. Now, how about doing," and you get another job. And that's exactly what happened. The person who is now the Deputy National Commodore for PAC area, um, was the Commodore of District 11 while at the time we were going through these exercises. So he saw it happen and he saw what we could do. And so he, in conversation with me, said, in effect, okay, good job for D11. Now, can we do the same thing for pack area? And I said, well, maybe, but that's what we're about to find out, whether we did it and how we did it. For those of you who aren't familiar with it, this is what the sectors look like in, well, I say North America, but it's obviously the Pacific as well in Alaska. Um, the names are not exactly right now because this is a slightly older map. Some of the names have changed of the sectors, but basically the number is there. This is the boots on the ground headquarters for the Coast Guard in primarily in North America. And so now the issue became, well, we could do that, but there's one other thing that we always wanted to do and were never able to, and that is to, instead of tying shore-based stations together, what we wanted to do was to consider tying a shore-based station to one or more Coast Guard cutters while they were at sea. This picture is of the Coast Guard cutter Healy, Whiskey Alpha Golf Bravo 20. So the number here, 20, is the number within that class of cutters. She's a polar level icebreaker. And there are right now two of them, actually three, but only two of them are operational. A third one, or what will ultimately be a fourth one, is being acquired, and they just let a contract for another one. And when I say just let a contract, it was like yesterday or the day before when they did it. So this is the kind of vessel that we were interested in being able to connect to on a regular basis. For scale, this is about 425 feet from bow to stern. Pretty good sized vessel. This is the other cutter, the other operational cutter, Whiskey Alpha Golf Bravo 10. She's called Polar Star, and we'll come back to her right at the end. She operates, well, I should step back because I didn't say this. The Healy operates primarily in the Arctic, Ocean, and has been to the North Pole 3 or 4 times and so forth and so on. This cutter, the Polar Star, operates in the Pacific and is one of the vessels that provides the primary logistical support to Operation Deep Freeze in McMurdo Station in Antarctica. We'll come back to her in a little bit. This is just a photograph taken. This is from the bow of the Healy, actually, on one of their recent patrols. This is probably December. Obviously, the sun is above the horizon, but she was not very far north at that point. She was north of the Arctic Circle, but probably not north of 70 north. So the sun was still above the horizon. But that's what they lived with for typically months at a time. Um, Here's the shield for the Healy. This is the logo for what is now the operational unit that I'm in charge of. It's called Pacific Area Auxiliary Communications Team. For those of you who've been around for a while, you might recognize this logo. This is a modification of the original logo for what used to be called the Communications Area Master Station Pacific, which is at Point Reyes, just north of San Francisco. That command is no longer exists as a command. So we adopted their logo. So for this project, that we're talking about now, these were the two partners: Coast Guard cutter Healy and us, the communications area the auxiliary communications team. Okay, so what did we do? Well, as this is a little more detail than what we talked about before, but beginning in the late summer of 2024, there was a senior chief. It was actually an electronics technician senior chief. Mike Leska is his name. He was assigned to the cutter, to the Healy, the cutter Healy. He and I had talked off and on for multiple months about the possibility of doing something between the land stations and the cutters. And we had never been able to actually pull it off. We'd come close a couple of times, but except in hand grenades, as we know, almost doesn't count. Um, and that's, oh, hand grenades and ballroom dancing. I forgot about that. Is that too? Anyway, so what the problem was that there was no easy way to use an existing radio on the cutter to do what we needed to do to connect between the auxiliary communications team and the cutter. So we elected to provide them with a separate station. We did that. We packaged it all up and shipped and shipped the equipment to Dutch Harbor, Alaska, because the Healy was going there for a port call. I had no idea, by the way, how complicated it is to actually get a package to Dutch Harbor, Alaska. It turns out to be not a simple process. Once you know the trick, then it works. But if you don't know the trick, it's kind of a surprise. Right? But it got there. The senior chief received it, had to do a little bit of repair on shipping damage, and got it on the air in November of 2024. Then that started the real work because now we had to figure out how are we going to actually connect to the ship and when and what we would do after that had happened. Um, so what we wanted to do is that we wanted to be able to do it on a regular schedule so that we could regularize or make the connection reliable. And it was done between the cutter, which at various times was as far north as about 73 north, and as far south as Juneau, which is not really far south, but as far south as Juneau, and two Coast Guard auxiliary stations. One is mine, the other is Ray Montañez, who's aboard here, and Whiskey 7 CIA. And no, there's no connection. Um, even if we both do actually use Signal, that's a different problem. But at any rate, um, so in late November, early December, we actually succeeded for the first time. We actually were able to connect between the cutter and I think Ray Station was first, mine was second. I don't remember now. Um, they heard us, we heard them. It's hard to describe for somebody like Ray and I, who've been doing this for many, many years. Hard to describe, however, the pleasure and the excitement of those first contacts. It's got to be a little bit like Marconi felt when the first message came across the Atlantic. It was really exciting. Then, however, came the real problem. To say we connected, all that means is we got a deal where it said, yes, I can hear you. Okay, that's fine. But what we really needed was we really needed the ability to do a to do message traffic between the cutter and the shore in both directions. So what we were able to do, and we'll get here in a little bit as to how we actually did that part of it. But what we achieved is what we set out to do. Verify that a small, what I call backyard HF radio station operating as a Coast Guard auxiliary facility could establish and maintain a viable comms link with an at-sea icebreaker over multiple thousands of miles. Typically, our path when we were working with Healy was somewhere between 2,000 and 2,600 miles. So a fairly decent path. Okay. And we were actually able to prove that we did that. By the way, most of the time we didn't run any more than 100 watts in each direction. Occasionally we would do more than that. Both Ray and I can run up to 500 if we need to. But we, most of the time in this case, we're limited ourselves to 100. This is what the facility looked like on the cutter, on Healy. The radio, ICOM 718, well known and long in the tooth radio, but one that works very well. Um, a interface to a computer and an antenna coupler. The antenna coupler is hooked in the case of the Healy, the antenna coupler is hooked to a 23 or 24-foot vertical that's on one of the rails. Okay. So that's and this radio, by the way, this belongs to the senior chief. That was his radio. So you'll notice it's on 14042. This is on a frequency outside the ham bands because what we have access to as Coast Guard Auxiliary Communications Team is 41 channels on HF between 3 megs and about 23 or 24 megs. So this is one of the ones that we happen to be using when this picture was taken. Okay. This is what the ALE signal looks like in the software when it's being received. The call sign for the cutter was this one, 1 Whiskey Sierra November Charlie Golf. 4 Alpha Golf Charlie Golf Quebec is the self-address for my station. I shouldn't have called this a call sign. It's a self-address. 1 Whiskey Sierra November Charlie Golf. The TIS, for those of you not familiar with the style, this stands for this is. So this is the equivalent of DE. It always shows you a bit error rate and a signal to noise ratio as well as the frequency that we're on. So this is a screenshot that the senior chief took from of his computer screen. Okay, why did we do this? Well, as I said, Mike Leska, the senior chief, and I and others had been trying to do this before, but we hadn't been successful. However, what happened as a result of the work that we did shore to shore on in the earlier project that I described was the value of having a contingency, or what Coast Guard sometimes calls a tertiary link, in place for the really bad day situations when what happens if actually happens. That's what we were after. That was the operational reason we were trying to do it. We had done that before, as I said, describing it in shore to shore, not a problem. And we learned, however, in that process, that some things were really important. One is, if we were going to put a station on the ship that was an independent radio, and I'll come back to that in a moment because that's an important point, and had to be relatively low cost. We said 2 to 3 grand per vessel. Let's put it that way. They had to be fairly easy to set up and operate because you probably, as you know, there's no such thing as a radio officer on board either commercial or military ships anymore. So you do not have people who have a solid background in communications, especially HF. It's a secondary duty. So they had to be easy to set up and operate, and they had to be able to operate successfully. No infrastructure, no internet, no satellites, no VHF repeaters, no nothing except 2 radios, 2 operators, 2 antennas. That's what we were after. That was the intent. So how did we do it? Well, we pretty much discovered that. I'm going to skip over most of this. There's a little more detail that was part of another presentation about that project that began in the summer of 2019. This commander, Commander Joe Graham, who at the time was the telecommunications officer for District 11, he's the one who found the problem and went searching for the answer. It turns out we're still in contact, and when we talk on the phone, probably, I don't know, once every couple of months at least. He has been long gone from here, from District 11, so he was in Miami for a couple of years. He's now on a TDY basis to Cyber Command in the Coast Guard. So we talk a lot, but I have no idea what he's actually doing because he can't really talk about it. So we put together this set of exercises that we wanted to do, and they were carried out by the auxiliary and overseen by the 2 successors to Commander Graham. Lieutenant Commander Jennifer Hohola and Lieutenant Ken Altavelli. He is the current person in that job, what they call the DT. It's the District Telecommunications person on the Admiral staff. Um, we did two big exercises. And when I say big, the plans for the exercises were on the order of 60, 70, 80 pages long. And what we intended was that we would not only do that, but we would make sure that we reported successfully on the results of those, because we wanted to learn from them. And so we had to create the usual formal after action reports. So we've started to focus the communication of digital information as in text messages, but the radio portion of all the tools we use is solely RF and is solely analog, specifically so that we could avoid having to depend on any um, external infrastructure. We did not want to have to depend on any infrastructure. For you, this is going to be not necessary for most of you, but just really quick. The basic tools: high frequency radio, automatic link establishment, and digital text messaging are the basic tools that we used. High frequency radios, 3 to 30 megahertz, bounced or refracted from the ionosphere. And automatic link establishment, for those of you who may or may not be familiar with it in detail, it identifies and automatically switches radios to the most effective frequency for use between a specific pair of stations in a specific location at an identified date and time. We use a piece of software, which is Windows software. Well, it's Windows software, and it is right now in beta, but we have used it now for at least 3 years, and it's getting really close to being finally released. We're very happy with it. It's a very effective way to do it and relatively inexpensive. By the way, if you go looking at commercial sources of automatic link establishment capable radios, you're going to find the least expensive one in the order of about 3,000, the most of them on the order of about 15 to 25,000. So not within the realm of what we were looking for. Okay. This is what we do for digital text messaging. There's actually three parts to it. The one that most people are familiar with is WinLink Express. It manages the interaction between the software, the text, and the radio. And then there's Vara, which is an ARQ mode kind of software that gives you 100% reliability and 100% data fidelity. In other words, it's either perfect or you have nothing. And it's really makes it really simple. However, the other issue that we had to deal with was we had a fixed format. For those of you who've been around long enough, it's what was commonly known as the 16-line format. And it's a version of that, which is almost all of the 16 lines. And we needed a tool to be able to easily create those messages in the right format. So a tool was written, record format messaging tool, RFM tool, where it's written again by Ray Montagna, who's aboard tonight, to create a correctly formatted message from notes that would be typically the kind of thing you'd get from an officer who said, "Hey, I need to send this to the admiral," and gives you notes and not give you and you're responsible for putting it in the format. So next step, take all the things that we had learned in the past about when we were doing it shoreside and see if we could make it work successfully from ship to shore, eventually from ship to ship, and accomplish what we had done shoreside, but in the seaborne world of Coast Guard cutters and icebreakers. That's where we are. We're halfway through this now. We have now made it work successfully from ship to shore. Our next step will be ship to ship, and then we will go on into refining that and being able to train the appropriate people. So now we're back to the Healy again. This, by the way, is Seattle. Her home port, Seattle, and this is somewhere in Puget Sound. I suspect on her way out of town, but I don't really know. And so the issue was, okay, how do we get to the seaborne stuff? Well, um, the senior chief called me up in the summer and said, "Hey, are you guys still doing the HF radio nets? And if so, could he participate?" Well, you bet you certainly can. I told him what we had accomplished, and then indicated that he was going to need the equipment, and I said we could provide that one way or another. We'll figure it out. We'll make it happen. So he then took it upon himself to go to his bosses, his ops boss, the executive officer for the Healy, and the skipper of the Healy, to get their permission because, after all, it's their boat. Um, and at the same time, I took it to my bosses in the Coast Guard Auxiliary and in Coast Guard District 11 to and in the other people, and to the other people in the auxiliary communications team to make sure that they would agree to it and that they would go along with it and that they would commit to making it actually happen. And then in the hopes that it would work. We just went ahead and did it. We got the equipment, we shipped it up to Dutch Harbor, et cetera, and with our fingers crossed, hoping that nobody would say no. And as it turned out, nobody did say no. The skipper of the Healy, a woman, Michelle Shallop, had some concerns, but when the senior chief explained it all to her, she said, "Well, take care of these problems, and we'll fix it. I'll agree to it. We'll say yes." And that's really all we needed. Um, Her idea was to do it to put the extra radio on the ship as what they call a non-operational radio. So in effect, what that means is it's not constrained by limiting to only Coast Guard channels. It's not restrained by limiting it to the issues of communication security and operational security. We could get around those problems by doing it that way. However, as anything else, there's no such thing as a free lunch. So what had to happen was she needed to be in a situation where if she wanted to shut it off, she could do so by literally throwing a virtual switch, and just automatically say, stop. And no matter when it was or what the issue was, didn't matter. She's in charge. That's it. She says yes, it stops. And it was all embodied in a document. This is the one part of the beginning page of the document, which is a standard operating procedure for non-operational radio communications. This covers a whole bunch of things in addition to what we were doing, including having a ham station aboard, which had been originally the case, but was not now the case. So this allowed that to happen again. So we went ahead and did that. So this is the senior chief, by the way, and this is the bow of the Healy, obviously, and the senior chief, and he's complaining. He said, "I got to get you a better picture." It's a fine picture as far as I'm concerned, but then I'm not him, so I would probably have the same argument if it were me. Um, so we said, as I've already described, we did two stations originally. Ray's station is in Cascade, Idaho, north of Boise. Mine is in Southern California, about halfway between LA and Palm Springs. As we already described, we started out just making a connection. Then once that happened, we did two things. First thing we did was to add additional stations. The District 11 auxiliary communications team consists of about between 15 and 20 HF stations that are the Ray's station is the furthest north, and the Mexican border is the southern end. Um, Most of those were not capable of doing this right away, but 3 other radio facilities were. 2 of them were in Southern California, and one is near it was and is near Sacramento. So we got that. We've added the additional stations. Let's see, what time is it? I'm gonna skip over this. This is actually a video that has no, it actually has no audio. You know what? I'm not gonna skip over it. I'm gonna go ahead and go with it. What will happen is as it runs, there are gonna be times when I'll stop it and then do some verbal so you understand what you're seeing, because we were not able to put audio with it as we went. So this is the sequence of communications that happens: message request, etc., etc. Um, this is a message request, and then that gets converted into a formal message. This is the software, is the front part of the software that Ray wrote to do this job. In a minute, you'll see these fields get filled in. This builds the message here. So you can see it'll get filled in. There's the call sign up here, the sending station, the receiving station, class, um, date and time, all that kind of stuff. Um, as you know, in the military, there are some things that are referred to as plain language addresses for facilities. So we had to allow for that being, because that's the way the messages are going to be addressed. Um, a subject line, typically whatever you want for a subject line. And then this is cut and paste the text of the message itself. And as you can see, all of this here is in now this format. This is the format which actually gets transmitted, and you can't make changes to that format. It's got to be that way for a whole bunch of different reasons. It's got to be that way. So let me go. Where am I? There I am. So we can take that and we'll cut and paste it, and we'll move it over to in this particular case, our style is, this is WinLink Express. And WinLink Express will take this and pass it to VARA, which is the modem and modulator demodulator for the traffic, and actually send it out. So this is what it looks like when it goes into the into WinLink Express. Cheat and copy the subject line from there to there. So that gets moved over. And then we can put it, let me, I need to stop here for a moment. We have done so far essentially everything as peer-to-peer messaging, meaning it goes radio to radio. It does not use the WinLink Express gateways that are used to do radio-based emailing, because we wanted to avoid the dependence on on the internet at all. Not because we thought it was bad, but because we wanted to make sure that we could accomplish what we needed to without the internet. So that's why this highlight of a peer-to-peer message is there. And continue on. This is the ALE screen. These are the frequencies that are being scanned, and this is just a waterfall. And this is the way you choose who you're going to send it to, and the kind of call you're going to make. And then the software, once you've done that, goes out and it calls the station that you're trying to that you're targeting. Okay. In this case, we're using this particular frequency. It is this station, or this self-address, I guess I should say, the way we should put it. This is what the call looks like when it's going out. And this is what the answer is, this one right here. And then it shifts to this screen. You'll see this will disappear in a little bit. We choose the station we want to send it to once we've connected to that station. Let me come down here and see, because this is going to disappear, and it's going to be replaced by that. Oops, wrong bloody button. Never fails. Now the question is, how do I get back to where I want to be? I think if I just go here, and I was out about here. Okay, that's where I want to be. All right. So this is now the what the software gives you back when you're making your connection. So this is all the stuff without going into the details. That's what it all looks like. And then it eventually makes the connection, verifies that it's the right station, and starts sending the message. So there it is, starts sending the message. When it finishes, well, as a process, this green bar up here gives you an indication of where you are in the process. We're almost complete. And then once it's done that, it'll get a confirmation back from the receiving station that says, yep, I got it all perfect. Everything's fine. So now we can disconnect. And that's what's happening here. We're now actually going to disconnect and go back to scanning. So now the station is back ready for the next call that comes in. That's basically the way ALE works. Okay. And this is what the screen looks like when you're there. We also have at Ray Writing an ICS 309 logging system, which allows cut and paste from the earlier windows directly into the log. So that's what this is, and that's what this shows you. This is the header, the log header, and this is the two messages that happen to be in this case. This is the outgoing message. This is an acknowledgement message because that's something that is automatically sent, well, semi-automatically sent. And then just as a final slide, we'll go to just a little bit larger so you can see what those messages look like. So this was a message that was sent to the Healy. This is the acknowledgement that was sent from the Healy back to, in this case, it was to Ray Station. Okay. All right, so there we are. That's that part. So we're almost to the end. I'm going to be within an hour. That's cool. That was the plan. This is just another example, a little bit bigger so you can see it if you wish. Look at it. And then, why is this important? Well, it's important going back to what I said before, that the real issue here is we were trying to build a backup tool that literally was bulletproof, and we cared for no infrastructure at all, except maybe a battery, if you want to consider that infrastructure. No internet, none of that. Just everything. 2 radios, 2 operators, 2 antennas. That's all you want. That's what we wanted to be able to do, because it's designed to take care of the problem when it is the worst of bad days. And it is also simple. So it's relatively simple to maintain. It's relatively simple to use. We believe that the technology gets more and more complicated. It's important to look to simplicity as a way to guarantee the likelihood of sustainability. And it needed to be relatively cheap. And what we're seeing is that as we've done this now over almost 6 months now, we're getting reaction from people in the Cutter Forces part of the Coast Guard and that command cadre that says, "Hey, are you really doing this? Can you really do it?" And that's one of the reasons we're moving on. Um, the other issue, which is one of those things that nobody wants to talk about, but it's true, as you can imagine, um, what's happening over time is that the people who had skills in HF comms and so forth and so on have basically they've departed. They've either died or they've retired or they've left or they're gone. Their skills are no longer there. So it's important that we're able to reestablish some of that knowledge and some of those skills. And the way we do that is recognizing that Coast Guard Auxiliary is in a unique position to do that because we don't get moved around from position to position every 2 years. Um, and we're old enough, and many of us are old enough to have some experience in actually being able to do this. And that's why, that's one of the reasons it's so important. So now this is the polar star. There's the 10. This is Antarctica. Where in Antarctica? I'm not sure. I suspect it's at the what's called the ice dock at McMurdo Station. This is the crew. Now, the crew of the Polar Star, obviously a large number of people. And latest news, I said that we needed to work with Polar Star, and she operates in Antarctica. Well, it's now coming on to winter in the southern hemisphere, which means that Polar Star has left Antarctica and is on her way back home. So one of the things that we tried, and it turns out that we were successful literally 3 days ago, or 4 days ago, on March 22nd. She was about 2,000 miles south of Hawaii. The a crew member of Polar Star, first class petty officer, MK1 machinery tech, had the opportunity to acquire a ham radio call sign as a military welfare station, and we spent about an hour. Ray and myself spent about an hour on 20 and 15 meters on Saturday afternoon, seeing if we could connect with the cutter, because she was now within range. 2,000 miles is like a 4,200 mile path from to my station, and almost 4,900 to Ray's station. And much to our surprise, we succeeded and we managed to exchange digital text between the cutter and it was my station in this particular case. Um, and about 4,100 miles, 75 watts on each end. Damn, it actually worked. Right? To say that we were surprised is not the right word. We were pleasantly surprised was really important. The next day, this past Sunday, the ship was now about 500 miles closer to San Francisco, which is her next designated stop. Um, we scheduled another test when the propagation should be better given the time of day. We did in fact have better signal strength, bit error rate, and signal to noise ratios. Um, and we actually exchanged message traffic. So not only was it, did you hear me now? We actually were able to exchange message traffic. So, and the bottom line is not only did we achieve a better, yeah, I hear you, we got tested our ability and succeeded with exchanging and acknowledging simulated traffic. So now what happens? Well, um, if you think back to the beginning, there was a slide that talked about Pacific Area Auxiliary Communications Team, not the District 11 Auxiliary Communications Team. That's the name of a brand new project, which I referred to earlier, where my former boss now became my boss again, but at a different level, because he's now responsible for 4 Coast Guard districts that cover all of the Pacific Basin from the Rockies all the way to Guam and Saipan and American Samoa and so forth. And he had come to me saying, "Can we do this?" Well, so now the answer is yeah. We not only can we've proven that we have shown that we can actually do it. So more cutters, more Coast Guard units, more Coast Guard Auxiliary District comms communities, and we hope more success. It's a real interesting challenge. It's a 2-year long project. We have till the end of calendar 2026 to get it done. And so that's the project that we're after. We're working with uh, under the oversight of this Deputy National Commodore for PAC area and operations because they do both a geographic and a functional assignment. Um, and we've got a commitment from the auxiliary flag officers in the 4 districts, 5 districts actually, 5 auxiliary districts in Pacific area. So we're working with them to figure out how to make this work and actually prove that it works. To say the very least, we're really excited about it. It's exciting times for us and for our leaders, and we recognize now for the Coast Guard itself, because we're actually giving them something they have not had in easily 20 years. And so, you want to know any more, you can contact me. That's my cell number. That's my Coast Guard auxiliary, my Coast Guard email address, or this is the same that we saw before, that URL that relates to that particular situation and joining up in the auxiliary. And here we are. This is the target, the logo for Pacific area. These are the 5 Coast Guard districts that are part of that. And this is the auxiliary communications team for PAC area. I believe that is, yes, that is the last one. I didn't hear anybody interrupt me. Granted, I don't give you a lot of choice. I tend to talk pretty fast and so forth. Thank you very much. We got it done in just about an hour. And I'm looking forward to any comments, questions that you might have now, or, as I say, feel free to contact me. Let me stop the sharing here. There we go.
Hey, Bill.
Yep, go ahead.
Dave Rockwell here.
Yeah, Dave.
One question. Ray's little form there looked like it was very interesting.
The 309, you mean? Or
Yep. No,
yep.
The record message format.
Oh, okay,
The
got it.
ACP 126 form. Have we looked into what it would take to make that a template in WinLink?
Not yet. Well, I have not. I don't think Ray has. Have you, Ray?
Not at this time, no.
Yeah, I didn't think so. We're aware of that as a possibility, because it would work pretty well. We're ironing out some of the documentation situations that we have here as we learn how to make it work well.
I would be more than willing to weigh in on that if you need emphasis.
Okay. Okay. Good deal. We will definitely keep that in mind.
All right.
Yeah. Excellent. Any other comments or questions?
If you have any questions, raise your hands, please, or send something in chat. Great presentation, sir. It was absolutely wonderful.
Thank you.
I grew up in the Boston sector. Now I am around the Miami sector. My grandfather was an RMC in World War II, so I'm kind of familiar with the communications of the Coast Guard.
Cool. Cool. Yeah. Oh, wonderful. Yeah, it's something that I enjoy immensely. I mean, there's just no other word for it.
Now, my question is, there used to be Army Navy Mars, which included the Coast Guard,
Right.
and they had Mars stations on board Navy ships at sea. Does this
Right.
kind of go with that, except it's more digital?
Yes, except it has typically a different target, a different goal.
Right.
In the early days of Mars, Mars was largely a morale and welfare situation. And that was true of the ships. It was also true of the shoreside stations. So from my perspective, we're focusing on I'll call them the quasi-operational issues, not the morale issues. But as I mentioned, with regard to the statement of that standard of operations, that allows for the use of MWR and marine welfare facilities using the same radios. So one of the things that we're looking at, and we actually just had the discussion, it was just last night, huh, Mr. McCoy, that we assigned a job to Bob McCoy, who is AJ6DH, who is also in the auxiliary, to do some kind of procedure to do exactly that, to make that available to the crews of these, especially the long haul cutters that are out for literally months at a time. So yeah, we will do that. We don't know exactly how yet. That's part of it. For us is it's very much a work in progress, and it's got like 15 little arms that are out here getting stuff done.
And if anyone out there is interested, please volunteer for the Coast Guard Auxiliary Communications. They're always looking for people, and they really do a good job. And especially with the search and rescue, on the East Coast, they're very involved with the search and rescue. I interfaced with them when we were looking for a missing sailor in the Gulf, and we worked together, and we were able to locate the person. So yes, volunteer. They're always looking for good people.
Oh, I cannot underline that too much. Yes, very true. We have a lot more to do than we have people to do it. So the more people we can get, good qualities, good qualifications, the better.
Anyone have any more questions? Raise your hand or speak up since it's not too much. Go ahead, Dennis.
Yeah, thanks, Barry. And I just want to say on behalf of RATPAC, thank you, Bill, for joining us this evening. This was great. It's great to see you. It's great to hear your story. And congratulations on both items, getting promoted and getting this project off the ground and having success at it. That's really cool. Now I understand why Steve called you.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I have a lot of conversations with Steve.
That makes sense to me now. So that's great. And I see Steve is on here, but he's not showing his face.
Oh, I was going to say, I don't see him, but that doesn't mean anything.
Yeah,
there he is.
There he is.
There he is. This is the person who is the connection between what we do with Coast Guard Auxiliary and a lot of shares and WinLink Express.
Right.
So,
yeah, we thank him for what he does too.
Oh yes.
Awesome job and what the group does.
How is this guy? I fell asleep.
Well, thanks again.
And it was what Bill didn't tell you is he used to run the show.
Oh, right.
He's very modest about that.
Well, Steve,
I don't know why.
You may not know this, but Bill and I go way back. In fact, I think I've still got the certificate here where I taught the class for your folks down in Long Beach.
That's right. Yes, I had forgotten about that. Yeah,
that was a long time ago.
It was. Yeah.
But that was cool. That was really cool.
So thank you again very much. I appreciate it, and we will be, I'm sure, in touch one way or another.
And can you send the slides to Dan when you're done?
Yes, I will. I wanted to wait until after I'd done it tonight. I can do a PDF, which will be everything except that video. That obviously the PDF doesn't translate.
Right.
If that's okay with you, that's fine.
Sure. Go right ahead.
Really appreciate you coming on and giving this.
My pleasure, believe me.
Most definitely. Yes.
All right.
All right. Anybody else? Any questions before we shut it all down? Raise your hands, put something in chat, One of the people said that they were interested in your adventure shipping your equipment to Alaska because he was in the armed forces up in Alaska and he understands the problems.
Well, one of the things that surprised me was when I do a lot of shipping when in my connection with the ham radio outlet, but when I went looking, one of the people in Dutch said to me, "How are you shipping it?" And I said, "Well, I was going to do. I know I can do UPS to Anchorage, but then it's going to have to be somewhere else." He said, "Trust me, do it all postal service because it's going to get there by UPS anyway." So, and it turned out to be, among other things, cheaper. So I was really surprised, but I learned a lot in the process of getting through that. It took about 10 days for it to get from Southern California to Dutch. And that was like 2 days to Anchorage and 8 days from Anchorage to Dutch. And because they only fly when they can. So,
Or by dog sled.
yeah.
All right. One
Okay.
more time. Any questions? Any comments before we shut it down? Thank you all for coming. We will see you all tomorrow night, same time, same station, for another presentation. Have a good night, everybody.
Thank you all very much. Good night.